The cruelest betrayals are never committed by strangers. They begin with the people who know exactly where your heart is. Evelyn Carter had always believed that family was the one promise the moon could never break. Even when the cupboards grew emptier each winter, even when the roof leaked during every hard rain, and even when the once proud Silver Hollow pack whispered about how little an Omega was worth during desperate times, she still believed her older brother would never let harm come to her. Logan Carter had raised her after their parents were gone. He had taught her how to gather herbs along the creek before sunrise, how to recognize wolf tracks pressed into damp earth, and how to smile even when life gave no reason to. That was why Evelyn never questioned him when he asked her to remain inside the cottage on the evening of the Blood Harvest Festival. Outside, lanterns flickered across the village square, casting warm golden circles over weathered wooden buildings while neighbors celebrated another difficult season survived. Laughter drifted through the crisp autumn air, but inside the Carter home the silence felt strangely heavy. Logan stood beside the old oak table with several folded papers spread before him, his broad shoulders tense beneath his worn jacket. A stranger wearing the dark gray cloak of a traveling merchant waited across from him, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a wide hat. Their voices stayed low enough that Evelyn could only hear fragments carried through the quiet room. Words like agreement, border, payment, and tomorrow slipped into the silence before disappearing again. When Logan finally reached for the ink bottle, his hand hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then he signed his name across the parchment. The merchant smiled with quiet satisfaction, folded the document, and placed a heavy leather pouch on the table. The unmistakable sound of silver coins settling against one another echoed through the cottage. Evelyn looked up from the basket she had been repairing, surprised by the amount. She had never seen that much money in one place. Logan quickly pushed the pouch out of sight before turning toward her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything's going to be different now," he said softly. Evelyn wanted to believe him. She truly did. She noticed the exhaustion beneath his smile, the sleepless nights carved into his face, and the burden he had carried alone for years. If this agreement could finally save them, perhaps hope had found its way home at last. She never noticed the way the merchant studied her with careful attention before quietly leaving into the fading evening light. Long after darkness settled over Silver Hollow, Evelyn packed only a small satchel because Logan told her they would be traveling before dawn. He claimed another pack had offered honest work where Omegas were treated fairly, where winter food was plentiful, and where she could finally build a better future. Every word sounded comforting, yet something deep inside her refused to rest. That night, she dreamed of endless forests covered in silver moonlight. Somewhere beyond the towering pines stood a man she could never fully see. His face remained hidden behind drifting mist, yet his voice reached her with impossible gentleness. "I've searched every dream for you," he whispered. She woke before sunrise with tears she could not explain. Outside, a black carriage waited near the road, its polished wheels glistening with morning dew. 4 mounted escorts stood nearby wearing unfamiliar insignias embroidered with the silver crest of Blackthorn Pack, the longtime rival of Silver Hollow. Evelyn frowned. Logan had always warned her never to cross their borders. "Why are they here?" she asked quietly. Logan avoided her eyes while fastening her travel cloak around her shoulders. "Because this is where your new life begins," he answered. Before she could ask another question, the lead escort unfolded the same parchment Logan had signed the night before. His calm voice carried through the cool morning air. "By lawful agreement, the Omega Evelyn Carter is hereby transferred into the custody of Blackthorn Pack." The world seemed to stop turning. Evelyn stared first at the document, then at the silver pouch still resting near her brother's boots. Understanding arrived without warning, cold and silent. She had not been offered a new beginning. She had been traded. Logan finally looked at her, but whatever words he meant to speak never came. Evelyn climbed into the waiting carriage without resistance. Her trembling hands folded quietly in her lap as the wheels began rolling toward the enemy border. Behind her, the only home she had ever known slowly disappeared beneath the pale light of dawn, while far beyond the distant mountains, a king who had never forgotten the face from his dreams unknowingly waited for the girl whose destiny had already begun moving toward his own. The carriage rolled steadily across the winding mountain road as the first rays of morning painted the endless forest in shades of pale gold and silver. Evelyn Carter remained quietly seated beside the narrow window, her fingers wrapped tightly around the small satchel resting on her lap. Every mile carried her farther from Silver Hollow, yet the ache inside her chest refused to settle into anger alone. Confusion lingered beside heartbreak, refusing to let her believe that Logan had truly exchanged her life for a sack of coins. She searched her memories over and over, looking for some hidden explanation she had failed to see. Had he been threatened? Had someone forced his hand? Or had she simply never known the brother she had trusted with every part of her heart? None of the escorts spoke during the journey. Their discipline was almost unsettling. Unlike the frightening stories she had heard throughout childhood, the warriors of Blackthorn Pack neither mocked her nor treated her like a prisoner. They kept a respectful distance, stopping every few hours to water the horses and offer her clean drinking water without a single harsh word. The silence surrounding them carried far more weight than open hostility ever could. As the sun climbed higher, enormous pine forests stretched in every direction until the towering walls of Blackthorn Fortress finally appeared beyond the hills. Evelyn had imagined an enemy kingdom built upon cruelty and fear, but what stood before her looked nothing like the terrifying legends whispered around village fires. Massive stone walls rose beside crystal rivers, elegant watchtowers overlooked green valleys, and colorful banners danced gently in the autumn breeze. Families walked through the outer market carrying baskets of fresh bread and apples while children laughed beside the fountain in the central square. It looked less like a land preparing for war and more like a place determined to protect peace. Yet beneath that peaceful surface lingered an unmistakable tension. Every guard she passed seemed unusually alert. Every servant lowered their voice whenever they mentioned the royal palace. One sentence reached Evelyn's ears more than once. "The king still refuses, every Luna." She looked toward the enormous castle standing above the valley, its dark stone walls glowing beneath the afternoon sunlight. Why would a king without a queen agree to accept an unwanted Omega from a rival pack? The question settled quietly into her thoughts. Inside the palace, preparations had begun long before the carriage crossed the border. Servants hurried through polished corridors carrying fresh flowers, while royal advisors quietly reviewed schedules for the evening council. Yet despite all their careful planning, one instruction echoed above every other order issued that morning. Protect the Omega. The command had come directly from Alpha King Damian Blackwood before sunrise. No one questioned it aloud, but every official exchanged the same puzzled glance. For nearly 10 years, the Alpha King had rejected every proposal for marriage. Noble daughters from powerful families had traveled across the Northern Territories hoping to earn his favor. Distinguished alphas had encouraged alliances that could strengthen entire kingdoms. Damian had declined every single one without hesitation. His decisions had become one of the greatest mysteries among the packs. Some believed his standards were impossible to satisfy. Others claimed his heart had turned colder than winter itself. No one knew the truth because Damian never explained himself. Deep within the western tower overlooking the valley, Damian stood beside an open window, watching clouds drift slowly above the distant mountains. The crisp autumn wind stirred his dark hair, while countless memories pressed quietly against his thoughts. For years, one impossible dream had returned whenever the moon reached its brightest point. A young woman with gentle blue eyes always appeared somewhere beyond endless forests glowing beneath silver light. Sometimes she stood beside a quiet stream. Sometimes she smiled while wildflowers danced in the wind. Sometimes she simply looked back at him with quiet sadness before disappearing into the morning mist. Every dream ended exactly the same way. He reached for her, and she vanished before he could learn her name. His advisors had called the dreams meaningless. The kingdom's seers had called them unfinished destiny. Damian had stopped asking for explanations long ago, yet he had never forgotten the face that appeared beneath every full moon. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Captain Rowan entered the chamber and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said, "the Omega from Silver Hollow has crossed the eastern gate. She will arrive at the palace before sunset." Damian remained perfectly still. His silver eyes lingered on the horizon, where golden light stretched across the forest, separating two worlds that had distrusted one another for generations. Something deep inside him stirred with quiet certainty, as though an invisible thread had finally begun pulling two distant lives toward the same destination. Without turning away from the window, he answered with calm confidence. Prepare the guest residence, not the holding quarters. She enters this kingdom under my protection. Even Captain Rowan, who had served beside the Alpha King for nearly 15 years, could not hide his surprise. But he simply lowered his head once more and replied, "Yes, Your Majesty," before quietly leaving the chamber, unaware that by the time the sun disappeared beyond the mountains, both the king's forgotten dreams and the Omega's broken future would begin changing forever. The palace gates opened without a single creak, revealing a courtyard so immaculate that Evelyn almost forgot she had crossed into the territory she had feared since childhood. Rows of white stone columns reflected the fading afternoon sunlight, while fountains shimmered with crystal-clear water, their gentle melody replacing the anxious pounding of her heart for only a moment. The carriage slowed to a graceful stop before the grand staircase, and one of the royal attendants stepped forward to open the door. "Welcome to Blackthorn Palace, Miss Carter," he said with a respectful bow. The unexpected courtesy caught her completely off guard. No chains waited for her. No crowded hall filled with jeering strangers. No prison gate stood open. Instead, every servant greeted her with quiet professionalism, as though she were an honored guest rather than an unwanted Omega from a rival pack. Evelyn stepped carefully onto the polished stone, clutching her satchel against her chest, while dozens of unfamiliar eyes watched from nearby balconies. Curiosity lingered in every glance, yet none carried the cruelty she had grown accustomed to back home. As she climbed the staircase, she noticed fresh flowers arranged along the entrance and banners embroidered with the silver wolf crest fluttering softly above the courtyard. Everything around her radiated order, dignity, and calm. It was nothing like the frightening stories told by the elders of Silver Hollow. Inside the palace, marble corridors stretched beneath towering stained glass windows that painted colorful reflections across the floor. Every painting displayed generations of Alpha Kings standing beside their lunas, their expressions filled with quiet confidence rather than conquest. Evelyn found herself wondering why the final portrait showed only one figure. Alpha King Damian Blackwood stood alone, his silver eyes fixed toward an unseen horizon. The empty space beside him seemed strangely intentional. "His Majesty has never permitted another portrait to be painted," whispered an elderly maid walking beside her. Realizing she had spoken aloud, the woman quickly lowered her head. "Forgive me. I should not gossip." Evelyn offered a gentle smile. "You did not offend me." The maid relaxed slightly before leading her through another corridor toward a peaceful wing overlooking the royal gardens. "This residence has been prepared especially for you," she explained. "If you require anything, simply ring the silver bell near the fireplace." Evelyn stopped walking. "For me?" she asked quietly. "There must be some mistake." The maid looked genuinely puzzled. "There is no mistake. These were the Alpha King's personal instructions." Evelyn stared at the elegant wooden door before her. She had expected a servant's room, perhaps even a guarded chamber. Instead, she entered a spacious suite filled with warm sunlight pouring through tall windows overlooking endless pine forests. Fresh linens covered a large bed, books rested neatly upon carved shelves, and a small vase of white lilies perfumed the air with a delicate fragrance. A simple blue dress had already been prepared beside the wardrobe. Everything had been arranged with remarkable care. None of it made sense. While Evelyn slowly explored the unfamiliar room, another conversation unfolded several floors above. Damien stood inside the ancient observatory where generations of rulers had once studied the stars. Beside him waited Lady Miriam, the kingdom's oldest historian and the only person who had known him since childhood. Her silver hair glowed beneath the evening light filtering through the circular windows. She watched him in thoughtful silence before finally speaking. "She has arrived." Damien nodded once. "I know." Lady Miriam folded her hands calmly. "You have worn the same expression only twice in your life. The first time was when the dreams began." Damien remained silent. For years he had hidden the truth from nearly everyone. Yet Lady Miriam had witnessed every restless morning after another impossible dream faded with sunrise. She had seen him spend countless evenings studying forgotten prophecies, searching old maps and questioning travelers from distant packs in hopes that someone might recognize the mysterious young woman who always disappeared before dawn. "Tell me honestly," she asked gently. "Do you believe she is the one?" Damien walked toward the enormous telescope overlooking the valley where twilight slowly settled across the forests. "I stopped believing in coincidence many years ago," he answered. "The dreams always ended before I reached her. Today, for the first time, they did not return." Lady Miriam's thoughtful eyes softened. "Because destiny no longer needs dreams once reality begins." Damien closed his eyes briefly as memories resurfaced with perfect clarity. Since the age of 16, every full moon had brought the same vision, the same blue eyes, the same quiet smile, the same overwhelming feeling that somewhere beyond mountains and rivers lived someone whose existence was forever intertwined with his own. He had never seen her name, never heard her voice beyond a whisper carried by moonlight, yet every dream left behind the same certainty. Find her before darkness does. He had never understood what that warning truly meant. Until now. At that very moment, Evelyn stepped onto the small balcony outside her room. Evening settled gently across Blackthorn Valley as thousands of lanterns flickered to life below like stars scattered across the earth. Cool mountain air brushed against her face, carrying the scent of pine, fresh rain, and distant fireplaces. For the first time since leaving home, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. Somewhere within the palace walls, unseen silver eyes lifted toward the same darkening sky, while two lives separated by years of unanswered dreams moved one quiet heartbeat closer to finally meeting. Evening settled gently over Blackthorn Palace as thousands of lanterns transformed the castle into a sea of warm golden light. Their reflections shimmered across polished marble floors while soft music drifted through the grand corridors, announcing the beginning of the royal welcoming banquet. Evelyn stood quietly beside the tall bedroom window, her hands folded in front of the simple blue dress that had been prepared for her. She had almost convinced herself that the invitation resting upon the small oak table had been delivered by mistake. Why would an unknown Omega from an enemy pack be invited into the king's great hall? Before she could question it further, a gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. The elderly maid from earlier smiled kindly as she entered. "Miss Carter, His Majesty requests your presence this evening. There is nothing to fear." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I have never attended a royal gathering." The maid carefully adjusted the ribbon around Evelyn's waist before stepping back with quiet satisfaction. "Then tonight will be your first." Minutes later, enormous bronze doors slowly opened before her. Warm candlelight flooded outward, carrying the comforting aroma of fresh bread, roasted vegetables, sweet apples, and cedarwood fires. The great hall stretched farther than Evelyn could have imagined. Crystal chandeliers sparkled beneath vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of ancient moonlit forests, while long tables overflowed with flowers gathered from every corner of the kingdom. Nobles, advisors, military captains, scholars, and respected families filled the hall with quiet conversation. The moment Evelyn stepped across the threshold, the room seemed to pause. Conversations softened. Curious eyes followed the unfamiliar Omega dressed in modest blue instead of expensive silk. Some guests quietly exchanged puzzled glances. Others simply watched with polite interest. They had expected someone frightened, defiant, or resentful. Instead, they saw a young woman who carried herself with quiet dignity despite obvious uncertainty. Evelyn kept her gaze lowered as she followed the royal attendant toward a seat prepared near the front of the hall. She could almost feel hundreds of silent questions surrounding her. Why had the king invited her? Why had he personally ordered guest accommodations instead of guarded quarters? Why was an enemy Omega seated among honored visitors instead of distant observers? Across the room, members of the royal council exchanged similar whispers. Captain Rowan leaned slightly toward Lady Miriam. "The court will not understand this decision," she answered calmly without taking her eyes from Evelyn. "Not tonight." Rowan frowned. "Do you?" Lady Miriam's gentle smile revealed nothing. "Perhaps tonight is not meant for understanding." Trumpets echoed through the enormous chamber. Every conversation immediately ceased. One by one, every guest rose respectfully as the great doors behind the throne opened. Alpha King Damien Blackwood entered with measured steps, dressed in a tailored black ceremonial coat embroidered with silver thread that reflected the candlelight like moonbeams upon fresh snow. His dark hair rested neatly across his shoulders, and his calm silver eyes carried the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to raise his voice to command attention. Yet tonight something felt different. Even those who knew him best noticed an unfamiliar tension hidden beneath his composed expression. Damien acknowledged the gathering with a graceful nod before beginning the traditional walk through the hall toward the royal table. Noble families bowed respectfully as he passed. Advisors greeted him. Military leaders offered formal salutations. He returned each greeting with practiced courtesy, but his attention seemed strangely distant, as though he were searching for something only he could recognize. Then he saw her. Time itself appeared to slow. Standing quietly beside her chair, Evelyn lifted her eyes for the first time. Soft candlelight illuminated her fair skin and gentle blue eyes exactly as they had appeared beneath countless dream-filled moons. The same quiet kindness, the same peaceful sadness. Even the delicate strand of light brown hair brushing against her cheek was unchanged from the impossible memories that had followed him for nearly a decade. Damien stopped walking. Every sound inside the great hall seemed to disappear beneath the sudden silence stretching between them. Evelyn looked back at the king with uncertain curiosity, unable to understand why the most powerful man in the Northern Territories stared at her as though he had just found something he had spent a lifetime searching for. A strange warmth settled deep within Damien's chest. Not excitement, not surprise, recognition. It arrived with absolute certainty, leaving no room for doubt. The dreams had never been imagination. They had been memories waiting for the future to arrive. Evelyn felt something equally unexpected. The fear she had carried since crossing the border softened without explanation. She had expected cold authority in the Alpha King's eyes. Instead, she found quiet relief, almost as though he had been worried she might never reach this place. Neither of them spoke. They simply stood across the hall while everyone else watched in growing confusion. Lady Miriam slowly closed her eyes for a single heartbeat before whispering words only she could hear. The moon has finally finished telling its story. Damien took one calm step forward, never breaking eye contact with the young Omega who had unknowingly lived inside his dreams for years, while Evelyn's heartbeat quickened beneath a feeling she could neither explain nor ignore, sensing that the moment she had feared most had quietly become the beginning of a destiny neither of them could escape. The silence inside the great hall lingered for another long moment before Damien finally continued walking, each measured step carrying none of the hesitation the court expected from a ruler facing a political guest. Yet Lady Miriam noticed what no one else could. For the first time in years, the weight that had quietly rested upon the Alpha King's shoulders seemed lighter. When he reached Evelyn, he stopped only a few feet away. Every noble present held their breath, waiting for some grand declaration or formal judgment. Instead, Damien offered the smallest bow of respect, one that surprised the entire hall. "Welcome to Blackthorn," he said calmly, his voice deep but unexpectedly gentle. Evelyn looked up, startled by the courtesy. She quickly returned a respectful bow. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The moment she spoke, Damien recognized the voice. It was softer than the whispers that had drifted through his dreams beneath countless full moons, yet unmistakably the same. A quiet certainty settled deeper within him. This was not coincidence. This was the ending of a search that had begun years before either of them understood why. Damien motioned toward the chair prepared beside the royal table. "Please be seated." Murmurs quietly rippled across the room. Never before had the Alpha King personally welcomed a newcomer with such consideration. Evelyn hesitated before taking her seat, still unable to understand why everyone seemed more surprised by the king's behavior than by her own arrival. As the banquet began, musicians played gentle melodies while servants carried elegant dishes through the hall. Conversation slowly returned among the guests, though countless curious glances continued drifting toward the royal table. Damien remained composed, exchanging brief words with advisors when necessary. Yet his attention repeatedly returned to Evelyn without conscious effort. Every small gesture felt strangely familiar. The careful way she thanked each servant. The quiet smile she offered whenever someone showed kindness. Even the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear matched memories he had carried for nearly a decade. Across the table, Evelyn sensed his gaze more than once. It should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, an unfamiliar calm settled inside her whenever their eyes briefly met. She had spent years learning to recognize contempt before it could become words. She knew the expressions of pity, disappointment, embarrassment, and judgment almost instinctively. None of those emotions appeared in Damien's silver eyes. What she found instead was something she could not explain. Relief. Almost as though he had finally recovered something precious that had been missing for a very long time. When the meal concluded, Damien quietly excused himself from the hall. Rather than returning immediately to his private chambers, he climbed the narrow spiral staircase leading toward the palace observatory, where Lady Miriam already waited beside an ancient stone table covered with faded maps and weathered scrolls. She looked up as he entered. "You have seen enough to know the truth," she said softly. Damien walked toward the wide circular window overlooking the moonlit valley below. "She is the one." Lady Miriam studied his expression carefully. "Because she resembles your dreams?" Damien slowly shook his head. "No, because the dreams ended the moment I saw her." The elderly historian remained silent, allowing him to continue. "For 9 years the same vision returned beneath every full moon. The forest, the light, her face. Every time I tried to reach her, morning took her away." He rested one hand upon the cool stone windowsill while the moon rose above the distant mountains. "Tonight there was no distance left between us. There was nothing left for the dreams to show me." Lady Miriam walked toward one of the oldest shelves inside the observatory and carefully removed a leather-bound volume whose pages had yellowed with age. She opened it to a hand-painted illustration showing 2 wolves standing beneath a silver moon separated by a winding river. Beneath the image, elegant handwriting filled the page. "Some bonds are not formed when 2 souls meet," she quietly read. "Some are remembered because they have been searching for each other long before either heart understands why." Damien lowered his eyes toward the ancient words. "Do you believe destiny truly works that way?" Lady Miriam smiled gently. "I believe destiny rarely announces itself with thunder. More often it arrives disguised as coincidence until enough pieces finally belong together." Meanwhile, Evelyn wandered onto the palace balcony outside her chamber, wrapped in a warm shawl against the cool mountain breeze. The valley below glowed beneath countless lanterns while the moon reflected across the quiet river beyond the castle walls. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Without warning, fragments of her own forgotten dreams returned. For years she had occasionally seen a distant figure standing beneath towering pine trees. His silver eyes watching her with patient kindness before morning always carried him away. She had dismissed those dreams as ordinary imagination, yet after meeting Damien, every forgotten detail returned with startling clarity. Her heartbeat quickened. It could not be possible. Dreams did not belong to 2 people at once. Yet somewhere else inside the palace, the Alpha King stood beneath the very same moon wondering whether the impossible had quietly become real, while neither of them realized that someone far beyond Blackthorn's borders had already begun setting another dangerous plan into motion. Morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of Blackthorn Palace, scattering ribbons of blue and gold across the polished marble floors. Evelyn had barely finished breakfast when a gentle knock sounded at her door. Captain Rowan stood outside, his posture as disciplined as ever, yet his expression carried an unfamiliar seriousness. "His Majesty requests that you enjoy the palace gardens today," he said respectfully. "You are free to walk wherever you wish within the royal grounds." The invitation surprised her. She had expected endless questions, strict supervision, perhaps even negotiations about her future. Instead, every passing hour brought another unexpected kindness. As she wandered through gardens filled with blooming white roses and towering evergreens, she noticed gardeners greeting her warmly and children laughing near a small pond where graceful swans drifted across the water. No one treated her like an enemy. No one whispered insults behind her back. For the first time in years, she felt invisible in the best possible way. She was simply another person enjoying a peaceful morning. High above the gardens, however, Damien's attention rested elsewhere. Inside the royal council chamber, an aged parchment lay unfolded across the enormous oak table. It was the transfer agreement that had accompanied Evelyn's arrival. Damien studied every line without speaking while Captain Rowan and Lady Miriam waited nearby. After several long moments, Damien quietly asked, "Does anything about this agreement concern you?" Rowan stepped closer. "Yes, Your Majesty. Several things." He pointed toward the signatures near the bottom of the document. "Blackthorn never requested an omega from Silver Hollow. We received an offer through an independent broker claiming the Carter family wished to negotiate lawful guardianship." Damien's silver eyes narrowed slightly. "Lawful guardianship." Rowan nodded. The wording avoided every traditional treaty between rival packs. Whoever drafted this document deliberately disguised its purpose. Lady Miriam carefully adjusted her spectacles before examining the faded ink herself. "There is another problem." She touched a nearly invisible symbol pressed into the lower corner of the parchment. "This seal does not belong to any recognized merchant guild." Damien immediately recognized the mark. It belonged to a private network of brokers who operated between pack territories, arranging confidential agreements for influential clients while keeping every sponsor hidden. Such brokers rarely acted alone. Someone with significant resources had orchestrated the entire exchange. Damien folded the parchment carefully. "Find the broker." Rowan bowed. "Already underway, Your Majesty." Before noon, 2 royal investigators returned carrying ledgers recovered from the abandoned trading office where the agreement had originated. Dust covered every shelf, as though the business had been vacated overnight. Most records had disappeared, yet one small journal remained hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Damien opened it slowly. Several routine transactions filled the first pages until one entry immediately caught his attention. Payment received through intermediary. Seller, Logan Carter. Additional compensation authorized after successful border transfer. Final instruction, ensure political consequences remain unavoidable. Damien read the final sentence twice. Political consequences. This had never been about poverty alone. Lady Miriam looked toward him with growing concern. Someone intended this exchange to provoke conflict. Damien nodded thoughtfully. If Blackthorn mistreated Evelyn, Silver Hollow would accuse us of violating pack honor. If we rejected the agreement, someone would claim we had insulted their sovereignty. Either outcome would deepen the hostility between our kingdoms. Rowan folded his arms. Then Logan accepted far more than money. Damien remained silent for a long moment before quietly answering. He accepted someone else's plan. Outside, unaware of the investigation unfolding within the palace walls, Evelyn paused beside the garden pond after noticing a young stable boy struggling to calm an anxious white colt frightened by fluttering birds. The nervous animal stepped backward repeatedly despite the boy's gentle efforts. Evelyn approached slowly without making sudden movements. "May I try?" she asked softly. The boy hesitated before nodding. Evelyn extended her hand patiently, speaking in a calm voice barely louder than the breeze moving through the trees. Within moments, the colt relaxed enough to lower its head toward her open palm. The stable boy's eyes widened with amazement. "He has been nervous all morning," he whispered. Evelyn smiled gently while stroking the horse's neck. Sometimes they only need someone willing to be patient. Unseen from the balcony above, Damien had witnessed the entire moment. The familiar warmth returned to his chest as another piece of the woman from his dreams quietly became real before his eyes. She did not seek admiration. She simply offered kindness wherever she found fear. At that same moment, far beyond the peaceful gardens of Blackthorn, Logan Carter stood inside a secluded hunting lodge where a richly dressed stranger placed another leather pouch filled with silver coins upon the table. The man smiled with quiet satisfaction before saying, "The first step is complete. Soon both packs will blame each other exactly as planned." Logan stared at the growing pile of silver without noticing the shadow of regret slowly settling across his face. Unaware that the truth hidden beneath his decision was already beginning to unravel inside the very kingdom where his sister had unexpectedly found not imprisonment, but protection. By the following afternoon, the peaceful rhythm of Blackthorn Palace had quietly shifted. Messengers crossed the castle grounds with unusual urgency. Council members gathered behind closed doors, and Captain Rowan personally supervised every report arriving from the southern border. Evelyn noticed the change without understanding its cause. Even the servants who smiled warmly at her only hours earlier now carried thoughtful expressions, though none treated her with anything less than kindness. She spent the morning helping one of the elderly gardeners gather fallen branches after a strong breeze swept through the royal orchard. While they worked beneath rows of apple trees, the old man chuckled softly. These trees always remind me that storms do not decide whether fruit grows. The roots decide that long before the wind arrives. Evelyn smiled at the simple wisdom. I wish people believed that about one another. The gardener looked at her with quiet understanding. Some already do. At that same moment, inside the royal council chamber, Damien placed the recovered ledger upon the polished oak table before the assembled advisors. Every page had now been carefully examined. Every payment traced. Every signature compared against merchant records throughout the northern territories. The conclusion disturbed everyone present. The broker never worked for Blackthorn, Rowan announced. He received funding from an organization calling itself the Ash Circle. Several council members exchanged puzzled glances. One elderly advisor frowned deeply. I have never heard of such a guild. Lady Miriam answered before Rowan could speak. Because it is not a guild. It is a network that profits whenever neighboring packs distrust one another. They create conflicts, manipulate negotiations, and disappear before anyone discovers who truly benefits. Damien quietly closed the ledger. Then Evelyn was never the objective. Silence settled across the room as the realization spread from one face to another. She was the excuse, Damien continued. Someone believed both kingdoms would respond with anger instead of reason. Rowan nodded slowly. Had we imprisoned her, Silver Hollow would accuse us of violating honor. Had we returned her immediately, the broker would claim we rejected lawful agreements. Every path led toward resentment. Damien rose from his chair and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the valley below. Not every path. His calm voice carried quiet certainty. We choose another. Far beyond Blackthorn's borders, Silver Hollow had already begun whispering its own version of events. Villagers gathered outside the meeting hall, repeating rumors that Evelyn had been taken into enemy territory against her will. Some blamed Blackthorn. Others questioned Logan's sudden wealth after years of poverty. Those whispers reached Pack Elder Marcus, who immediately demanded answers. Summoned before the council, Logan entered with forced confidence, though his hands betrayed a nervous tremor. Tell us exactly how your sister left our territory, Marcus said firmly. Logan repeated the story he had practiced countless times. He insisted Evelyn had willingly accepted an opportunity for a better life. He claimed the agreement had been honorable. He insisted Blackthorn had offered fair compensation. But before the council could respond, another elder quietly placed a folded letter upon the table. It had arrived only minutes earlier bearing the unmistakable silver seal of Blackthorn Palace. Marcus broke the seal and slowly read the contents. The chamber felt completely silent. Finally, he lowered the letter and looked directly at Logan. Alpha King Damien requests a formal gathering between both packs 3 days from now. Logan forced a smile. Then perhaps they wish to negotiate peace. Marcus continued reading. His Majesty states that newly discovered evidence concerning the transfer agreement must be presented before both councils to prevent further deception. Logan's smile disappeared. His heartbeat quickened as the words echoed inside his mind. Newly discovered evidence. Until that moment, he had believed the anonymous broker's promise that every document would vanish after the exchange. Instead, Blackthorn had uncovered something. He simply did not know how much. Back inside the palace, Damien found Evelyn standing near the western overlook where endless forests stretched toward the distant mountains separating their kingdoms. She turned as he approached, offering a respectful greeting. Your Majesty. Damien stood beside her, gazing toward the horizon for a quiet moment before speaking. When you look across those mountains, what do you see? Evelyn studied the distant landscape carefully. Home, she answered after a pause. Even if I do not know whether it still considers me family. Damien nodded thoughtfully. I see 2 kingdoms that have spent generations believing the worst about each other. Evelyn looked toward him with gentle curiosity. Can that ever change? Damien's silver eyes remained fixed upon the horizon where sunlight illuminated both territories without choosing between them. Only if someone is willing to protect the truth even when lies seem easier to believe. Evelyn did not fully understand his words, yet something in his voice made her feel unexpectedly safe. As the afternoon breeze carried the scent of pine across the overlook, neither of them realized that the meeting now being arranged between the rival packs would soon reveal not only who had orchestrated the betrayal, but also how one ordinary Omega had unknowingly become the key to preventing a conflict that others had spent years preparing to ignite. 3 days later, the ancient Moonstone Summit stood beneath a bright autumn sky, its broad circle of weathered granite resting exactly on the border that had divided Blackthorn and Silver Hollow for generations. Long before sunrise, representatives from both packs had gathered around the sacred meeting ground where countless treaties had once been signed and countless arguments had just as easily undone them. Cool mountain air carried the scent of pine and fresh earth while colorful leaves drifted across the clearing like quiet reminders that every season eventually changed. Evelyn stood beside Lady Miriam near the edge of the assembly, her hands folded calmly despite the uncertainty growing inside her heart. Across the circle, she recognized familiar faces from Silver Hollow. Some avoided looking at her. Others stared with obvious confusion after seeing that she appeared healthy, well-dressed, and entirely unharmed. Logan stood near the front beside Elder Marcus, his confidence carefully rehearsed, yet the shadows beneath his eyes betrayed several sleepless nights. When his gaze briefly met Evelyn's, she searched desperately for the brother who had once promised to protect her. Instead, she found a man burdened by secrets he could no longer carry comfortably. A royal herald stepped forward and announced the beginning of the council. Damien approached the center of the stone circle with steady confidence, wearing the same calm expression that had guided his kingdom through years of uncertainty. Once silence settled over the gathering, he spoke without anger or accusation. "We stand here today because someone believed distrust would speak louder than truth." His voice echoed gently across the clearing. "I refuse to allow that belief to decide the future of either pack." He motioned toward Captain Rowan, who presented the recovered ledger, the transfer agreement, and the broker's journal upon a polished wooden table placed between both councils. Every document was carefully examined by elders from each kingdom. Murmurs spread through the crowd as matching signatures, hidden payment records, and the unfamiliar seal of the Ash Circle revealed a story far different from the rumors that had traveled across the mountains. Elder Marcus slowly lifted his eyes toward Logan. "Did you know these additional payments existed?" Logan hesitated. The silence surrounding him became heavier than any answer. Finally, he lowered his head. "I believed I was saving our future," he admitted quietly. "The broker promised that no one would be harmed. He said both packs would negotiate after the transfer. He said the money would rebuild our home." Elder Marcus looked disappointed rather than angry. "You trusted someone who profited from division." Logan closed his eyes briefly. "I know that now." Damien stepped forward before blame could spread through the gathering. The Ash Circle wanted two kingdoms to fear one another. They expected revenge. They expected suspicion. Instead, they will receive neither. His words carried across the summit with quiet authority. Blackthorn holds no claim over Evelyn Carter. She was never purchased as property because no person can belong to another. A wave of surprise moved through both crowds. Damien turned toward Evelyn, his expression unchanged except for the warmth quietly visible within his silver eyes. "Evelyn," he said gently, "your future belongs to you alone. If you wish to return to Silver Hollow, you may leave today under royal protection. If you wish to remain in Blackthorn, you will stay as an honored guest. If you choose an entirely different path, my kingdom will respect that decision as well. No agreement signed by another person will ever decide your life again." The entire summit fell silent. Evelyn felt tears gathering before she even realized why. Since childhood, others had always decided where she belonged, what she was worth, and how little her voice mattered. Yet the most powerful man she had ever met now placed her future entirely in her own hands. Lady Miriam quietly smiled beside her, understanding that some gifts could never be measured in gold or treaties. Logan slowly stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Evelyn, I cannot ask you to forgive me." His eyes filled with regret. "I convinced myself I was protecting us. Instead, I forgot the difference between providing for family and sacrificing family." Evelyn looked at the brother she had once trusted completely. The pain remained, But so did the memories of the boy who had taught her to gather herbs beside quiet streams many years before fear and desperation clouded his judgment. She answered softly, "Forgiveness takes time. Truth is where it begins." No one spoke for several long moments. The autumn breeze carried fallen leaves across the ancient stones, while two rival packs witnessed something far rarer than victory. They witnessed mercy chosen over resentment, honesty chosen over pride, and freedom offered without demanding anything in return. High above the clearing, sunlight broke through drifting clouds, illuminating the border that for one unforgettable morning no longer felt like a line dividing enemies, but the beginning of a bridge that only courage could build. The gathering at Moonstone Summit ended without cheers or celebration because everyone present understood they had witnessed something far more meaningful than victory. They had watched truth accomplish what fear never could. As the elders returned to their respective packs carrying a newly signed peace accord, the old stories of endless hatred no longer sounded quite as convincing. For the first time in generations, the road between Blackthorn and Silver Hollow remained open, not because anyone had forgotten the past, but because enough people had finally chosen a better future. Evelyn stood quietly near the ancient stone circle long after most of the crowd had departed. The afternoon breeze carried golden leaves across the weathered ground, while distant birds circled above the towering pines. She realized that the weight she had carried for so many years had begun to lift. She could not erase the betrayal she had endured, nor could she pretend that trust would return overnight. But she finally understood that another person's choices no longer defined her worth. Her future belonged to her, and that simple truth felt more precious than anything she had ever owned. Soft footsteps approached from behind. Damien stopped beside her, leaving enough space for silence to remain comfortable between them. For several moments, they simply admired the mountains stretching endlessly beneath the clear blue sky. Finally, Damien smiled gently. "Have you decided where your path leads?" Evelyn looked toward the valley where the roads separated before disappearing into different forests. One road led back to familiar memories. The other led toward uncertainty, filled with unexpected kindness. She turned to meet his silver eyes and answered with complete honesty. "I do not want my next step to be chosen by fear." Damien nodded. "Neither do I." He reached into the pocket of his formal coat and carefully removed a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon resting against a pine branch. "This belonged to my mother," he said softly. "She believed that every traveler deserved a place where they could return without asking permission. I would like you to have it, not as a promise you must accept, but as a reminder that you will always have a home if you choose one here." Evelyn accepted the pendant with trembling hands. It was not a crown. It was not a chain. It was simply an invitation freely given. She smiled through quiet tears. "Then I would like to stay." Those 4 words carried no obligation, no contract, and no prophecy. They were entirely her own. Lady Miriam watched from a respectful distance, her gentle smile brighter than ever before. "The dreams did not bring them together," she whispered to Captain Rowan. "The dreams only helped them recognize what their hearts would eventually choose for themselves." Weeks passed, and the changes reached farther than anyone expected. Trade resumed between the neighboring packs. Families who had spent decades fearing one another began exchanging goods, stories, and harvest celebrations. The children who played near the border no longer grew up believing that kindness ended where another territory began. Logan remained in Silver Hollow, working every day to repair the trust he had broken. He never asked his sister to forget what happened. Instead, he accepted that redemption was built through consistent choices rather than easy apologies. Evelyn visited him from time to time, and although their conversations were often quiet, each meeting became another small step toward healing. At Blackthorn Palace, Evelyn slowly discovered that belonging was never something earned through perfection. She spent her mornings helping in the gardens, reading beside Lady Miriam in the royal library, and bringing comfort wherever gentle hands and patient words were needed. Damien never rushed her heart or her decisions. He simply walked beside her, allowing friendship, respect, and quiet understanding to grow naturally with each passing season. One evening beneath the brightest full moon of the year, they stood together on the palace balcony overlooking a valley filled with thousands of glowing lanterns. Damien glanced toward Evelyn with the same peaceful smile that had once existed only inside impossible dreams. I searched for your face for years, he said quietly. Evelyn looked at the moon shining above them before answering. Perhaps we were never searching for each other. Perhaps we were simply learning how to become the people we needed to be before we met. Damien smiled, knowing no wiser words could have been spoken. Above them, the moon illuminated two hearts that had found one another not through possession, but through freedom, compassion, and trust. And perhaps that was the greatest reminder of all, that true strength never begins with power, true love never begins with ownership, and destiny is not something that traps us, but something that quietly waits until we are brave enough to choose it. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it with someone who believes kindness is stronger than fear, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and whether you think Evelyn made the right choice in following her own heart.